Some creatures don't fight to live, they wait to be found. The foal stood alone in the middle of the desert, its small frame trembling under the weight of a sun that refused to show mercy, the sand stretching for miles in every direction like an endless ocean of fire. And yet it did not wander, it did not cry out, it only dug, its tiny hooves scraping against the dry earth with a quiet urgency that felt almost deliberate, almost knowing, as if something beneath the surface was calling it back again and again, the wind pushing against its fragile body, carrying grains of sand that stung like whispers of time itself. But still it stayed, still it dug, and if anyone had been there to witness it, they would have sworn the creature wasn't lost at all, that it had chosen this exact place for a reason it could not explain, a reason no one yet understood. And then, just as suddenly as the image appeared, the moment folds back on itself. 3 days earlier, when Caleb Whitaker first saw the mare lying in the distance, a shape barely distinguishable from the pale dunes, her body still, too still, like something the desert had already claimed but hadn't yet carried away, his truck slowing almost without his permission as he narrowed his eyes against the glare, the heat outside reading just over 100 degrees, the kind that baked the air until even breathing felt like swallowing dust. He told himself to keep driving, that whatever lay out there wasn't his burden, not anymore, not after everything he had already lost to this land. But something in the way the mare's head rested, not collapsed, not broken, just waiting, pulled at him with a quiet force he couldn't shake, and before he realized it, the engine was off, the silence settling around him like a held breath, his boots hitting the ground, sinking slightly into the hot sand as he made his way toward her, each step slower than the last, as if the desert itself was asking him to reconsider, to turn back while he still could. But Caleb had spent too many years walking, away from things he didn't understand, too many nights replaying the moments he wished he had stayed, and when he finally reached her, the mare's eye opened just enough to catch his shadow, dark and glassy but not empty, never empty. There was something there, something stubborn, something unfinished, and she didn't flinch, didn't try to rise, didn't even breathe any faster. She just looked past him, beyond him, toward a distant point somewhere out in the dunes, as if he was never the one she had been waiting for at all. And that was the moment Caleb realized this wasn't just a dying horse in the desert. This was a story already in motion, one that had started long before he arrived, and one that, whether he wanted it or not, had just found him. Caleb did not reach for the mare right away. He stood there for a long moment with the heat pressing down on his shoulders and the wind dragging slow lines across the sand, studying the way her ribs rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths, counting each one without meaning to, the habit of a man who had learned to measure life in small, fragile rhythms, and something about it brought back a memory he had spent years trying to bury, the quiet sound of breathing in a room that had once been filled with voices, laughter, and something warm enough to feel like home. But the desert had a way of stripping memories down to their sharpest edges, leaving only what could not be ignored, and Caleb exhaled slowly, pulling off his hat as he crouched beside her, the brim brushing against his knee, his hand hovering just above her neck before finally settling there, rough fingers meeting a coat that felt warmer than it should have, dry but still alive, and the mare did not resist, did not even react beyond a faint shift in her breathing, as if she had already decided that whatever came next would not be something she needed to fight. But her eye moved again, not toward him, not toward the sound of his voice when he murmured something low and steady, words that carried more habit than meaning, but back toward that same distant point, always the same direction, as though the horizon itself held something she refused to let go of. And Caleb followed her gaze this time, squinting into the glare, seeing nothing but miles of empty land. No fence lines, no structures, no water, nothing. That would explain why a horse would stay out here until the very end instead of turning back. And that was when he noticed the tracks more clearly, not just the mare's, but smaller ones, lighter, circling, stopping, starting again, too deliberate to belong to drifting wildlife, too close to her body to be coincidence. And his jaw tightened as he shifted his weight, brushing sand aside with the side of his boot, revealing the faint imprint again, the shape of something young, something that should not have been able to survive out here for more than a few hours. let alone long enough to leave a pattern like this. And for a brief second, a thought crossed his mind that did not feel entirely like his own, that whatever had made those tracks might still be nearby, watching, waiting, just beyond the reach of his sight, and the desert suddenly felt less empty than it had a moment before, heavier somehow, as if it was holding on to a secret it was not ready to give up. And Caleb straightened slowly, glancing once more toward the horizon before looking back down at the mare, her breathing shallower now, her strength slipping in quiet increments. And he knew what the sensible choice was, to leave her here, to let the land take what it had already begun to claim. But sensible choices had never been the ones that stayed with him, not the ones that followed him into the long hours of the night when the world went silent and there was nothing left to do but remember. And with a quiet sigh that seemed to carry more weight than the moment itself, he reached for the rope hanging from his belt, looping it gently around her neck, not pulling, not forcing, just offering a connection. And for the first time since he had arrived, the mare's gaze shifted, not away from the horizon entirely, but enough to acknowledge him, enough to suggest that whatever she had been waiting for might finally be close. And Caleb did not understand it yet, not fully, but he felt it, that same quiet pull that had made him stop his truck in the first place, a sense that this was not where the story ended, that somewhere between the tracks in the sand and the silence stretching across the desert, something was still unfinished, something that had not yet been revealed. The rope felt almost weightless in Caleb's hands as he adjusted it, not tightening, not pulling, just guiding the space between them into something quieter, something that resembled trust more than control. And for a long second nothing changed. The mare remained where she was, her legs folded beneath her, her body still pressed into the heat of the sand, as if the ground itself had claimed her strength. But then, with a slow and uncertain shift, she tried, not rising fully, not yet, but enough to show that whatever held her there was not only weakness, it was choice. And Caleb stepped back instinctively, giving her room, the way a man does when he knows forcing anything will break it, his eyes fixed on the small details, the trembling along her flank, the uneven rhythm of her breath, the way her ears flicked once toward that same distant horizon before settling again. And he realized then that bringing her back would not be simple, not a matter of effort or distance, but of time, time she might not have. And still he stayed, the desert stretching silent around them, the kind of silence that pressed against the ears until even the smallest sound felt amplified. The scrape of sand beneath her hooves as she tried again, the faint exhale that followed. And Caleb found himself speaking without thinking, low and steady, the kind of voice he had once used for things far more fragile than this. Easy now, we are not in a hurry. Even though everything about the moment suggested they were, the sun climbing higher, the heat thickening, the miles between them and anything resembling shelter. But the mare did not respond to urgency. She responded to patience. And after another long pause, she shifted again, this time managing to lift herself just enough to bring one leg beneath her, then another, the movement slow, deliberate, as though each inch carried weight far beyond her body. And Caleb watched, not helping, not interfering, just present, because sometimes presence was the only thing a living creature needed to keep going. And when she finally rose, unsteady but standing, there was no triumph in it, no sudden surge of strength, only a quiet continuation, a refusal to fall just yet. And Caleb exhaled through his nose, adjusting his grip on the rope, not leading her forward immediately, just turning slightly, offering direction instead of command. And for a moment she did not follow, her head turning once more toward the open desert, that same fixed point that seemed to anchor her even now. And Caleb hesitated, glancing back the way they had come, the truck a distant shape against the shimmering air, then forward again into the emptiness. She kept watching, and something in his chest tightened, not fear, not doubt, but the recognition that whatever this was, it was not finished out here, that leaving might mean walking away from something he had not yet understood, and yet staying could cost the mare whatever strength she had left. And the choice settled between them like the heat itself, heavy and unspoken, until finally Caleb made the only decision he knew how to make. He stepped forward slowly, the rope slack, his body angled not to pull her away from where she looked, but to walk beside it, to respect whatever silent pull guided her. and after a breath that seemed to stretch across the entire desert, the mare moved. One step, then another, not toward the truck, not yet, but in a direction that lay somewhere between survival and whatever unseen truth she carried, and Caleb followed. Not because he understood, but because for the first time in a long while he felt something stronger than reason guiding his path, something quiet, something steady, something that did not ask to be explained, only trusted. The desert did not offer shade. It did not offer mercy. And as the minutes stretched into something longer, something heavier, Caleb began to feel the cost of every step they took, the heat pressing through his shirt, the dry air pulling moisture from his throat, until even swallowing felt like effort. But he kept his pace slow, matching the mare beside him, never moving ahead, never pulling the rope tight, only walking in quiet alignment with whatever direction she seemed to choose. In it became clear after a while that this was not wandering, not confusion. Because each time Caleb tried to angle even slightly toward the distant outline of his truck, the mare would resist in the smallest way, not with force, not with panic, but with a pause, a hesitation that spoke louder than any struggle, her body leaning just enough to pull the invisible line back toward that same point in the desert she had fixed her gaze on since the beginning, and Caleb noticed it. The pattern repeating itself again and again until it could no longer be ignored. This was not a horse trying to survive. This was a horse trying to reach something. And the realization settled into him slowly, like the heat itself, unavoidable once felt. And he stopped, just for a moment, letting the rope hang loose between them as he followed her line of sight once more, the horizon wavering in the distance, heat bending the air into soft distortions that made shapes where there were none. And yet the mare stood there as if she could see something perfectly clear, something real. And when she took another step in that direction, Caleb did not redirect her this time. He let her lead, a quiet shift in their roles that neither of them acknowledged, but both seemed to understand, and the ground beneath their feet began to change in subtle ways. The sand slightly more compact, faint traces of disturbed earth appearing where the wind had not yet erased them completely, and Caleb slowed again, crouching briefly to brush his hand across the surface, feeling the difference, seeing the faint outline of smaller tracks once more, fresher this time, not just remnants but signs of recent movement, and a strange tension rose in his chest, not fear, not exactly, but the awareness that whatever had made those prints was not far ahead, and as he stood again, his eyes scanning the landscape more carefully now, the emptiness no longer felt empty. It felt watched, not in a threatening way, but in a quiet, patient way, as if the desert itself had been waiting for someone to notice what it had been holding on to. And the mare continued forward, slower now, her strength thinning with each step, but her direction never faltering, and Caleb stayed beside her, one hand lightly resting near the rope, the other shading his eyes as he searched the distance, until finally something shifted, not in the land, but in the sound. A faint noise carried on the wind, so soft he almost missed it, a short, uneven exhale, followed by the light scrape of movement against sand, and Caleb froze, his breath catching for just a second as he turned his head toward the source, his eyes narrowing against the brightness. And there, just beyond a small rise in the dunes, something moved, small, unsteady, barely visible against the pale ground, and for a moment it did not make sense, the shape too slight, too fragile to belong out here. And then it lifted its head, and Caleb saw it clearly for the first time, the foal, standing alone in the desert, exactly where the mare had been trying to go all along, its legs thin and uncertain, its body coated in a fine layer of dust that dulled its natural color, but its eyes, even from a distance, held something sharp, something aware, something that did not match its size or its age, and the mare beside him let out a breath, softer than anything he had heard from her so far, not relief, not quite, but recognition, and Caleb understood in that instant that none of this had been chanced, that every step, every hesitation, every refusal to turn back had been leading to this exact place, to this exact moment, and whatever came next would not be something he could simply walk away from. Caleb did not move at first, not because he was afraid, but because something in the moment felt too precise to interrupt, the foal standing there on the other side of the low rise as if it had been placed exactly where it needed to be, its small chest rising and falling in quick, uneven breaths that carried across the still air. And yet there was no panic in it, no frantic motion to flee, only a quiet awareness as it watched him. Watched the mare, as though it had already decided neither of them were a threat, and beside him, the mare shifted, her body leaning forward with what little strength remained, her steps slower now, heavier, but unmistakably drawn toward the young one, and Caleb loosened his grip on the rope even more, letting it fall slack against his hand, understanding that whatever was happening here did not belong to him to control. And as they moved closer, the foal did not retreat. It held its ground, its ears flicking once toward the wind, then back again, its gaze steady in a way that felt far older than its fragile frame. And when the distance between them closed to just a few feet, the mare let out a low breath, softer than before. Something almost like a whisper carried through the dry air, and the foal responded, stepping forward with careful, uncertain movements, each step testing the ground as if it had learned early not to trust it. And Caleb watched in silence as the two reached each other, the mare lowering her head just enough to touch the foal's neck, the contact brief but certain, a connection that did not need to be explained. And for a moment, the desert seemed to pause around them, the wind easing, the heat settling into something less oppressive, as if even the land recognized the importance of what it was witnessing. And Caleb felt something shift inside him, something he had not allowed himself to feel in years, not quite hope, not yet, but something close enough to stir the edges of it. And then the foal turned, not away, but slightly to the side, its head angling back toward the dunes behind it, and without hesitation, it began to move again, stepping past Caleb as if he were simply part of the landscape, its small hooves pressing into the sand with that same quiet determination he had seen before. And Caleb frowned slightly, glancing at the mare, expecting her to remain where she was, to rest now that she had reached what she had been searching for. But instead she followed, slower than before, her steps uneven but intentional, her focus no longer fixed on the horizon but on the foal itself. And Caleb stood there for a heartbeat, caught between instinct and something deeper, then turned and fell into step behind them, the rope trailing loosely from his hand, no longer a guide but a reminder of how little control he truly had in this moment. And as they moved together across the sand, the foal leading, the mare following, Caleb could not ignore the growing sense that this was not the end of a search. It was the beginning of something else, something that lay just ahead, buried beneath the surface of a place that had hidden its secrets well. And the farther they walked, the more certain he became that whatever the foal was leading them toward, it was not random, it was not instinct alone, it was purpose, clear and unwavering. And for the first time since he had stepped out of his truck, Caleb realized he was no longer deciding where this path would go, he was simply following it. The foal did not hesitate, not once, its small body moving forward with a quiet certainty that did not belong to something so young. And Caleb found himself watching its steps more closely now, noticing how it did not wander or circle, how each movement carried direction, intention, as though it was following a path already etched into the land, one that only it could see. And the mare followed behind with fading strength, her breathing thinner with each passing moment, her legs trembling in a way that spoke of limits being reached. Yet she did not stop, not even when Caleb slowed, not even when the heat pressed harder against them. She stayed focused on the foal, as if the sight of it alone was enough to carry her forward. And Caleb felt that same quiet pull again, stronger now, heavier, like a thread tightening between something unseen and the ground beneath his feet. And as they moved over another low rise, the sand began to change again, not in color, not in shape, but in texture, firmer underfoot, less disturbed by the wind. And the foal slowed for the first time, its head lowering slightly, ears flicking back and forth as if listening for something beneath the surface. And then it stopped, completely still, the kind of stillness that holds weight. And Caleb felt his own steps come to a halt without thinking, his eyes shifting from the foal to the ground, scanning for anything that might explain the sudden pause. But there was nothing obvious, nothing visible beyond the endless stretch of pale sand. And yet the foal remained there, unmoving, its gaze fixed on a single spot just ahead of its front hooves. And then, without warning, it began to dig, its small hooves scraping against the surface with a quiet urgency, not frantic, not wild, but steady, repeated, as if it had done this before, as if it knew exactly what it was trying to reach. And Caleb frowned, stepping closer, his boots pressing into the sand as he watched the shallow marks deepen, the top layer giving way slightly under the repeated motion, and the mare behind him let out a faint breath, her body shifting as if to move forward again. But this time she did not follow. This time she stayed where she was, her legs folding slowly beneath her as she lowered herself to the ground with a controlled, deliberate motion, not collapsing, not falling, but choosing to stop. And Caleb turned quickly at the sound, his attention snapping back to her, his hand tightening slightly around the rope out of instinct. But she did not struggle, did not attempt to rise again, her eyes still open, still aware, watching the foal with a quiet intensity that held no fear, only purpose. And Caleb stood between them for a moment, caught in the space between two moments unfolding at once, the foal digging into the earth with growing persistence, the mare settling into stillness as if her role in this journey had already been fulfilled, and the desert seemed to close in around them, not in threat, but in silence, a silence that carried anticipation, as if something long hidden was about to surface. And Caleb felt it in his chest, that same tightening, that same sense that he had stepped into something far beyond coincidence, far beyond chance. And as he looked back down at the foal, its hooves now uncovering a darker layer beneath the pale sand, something more compact, something that did not belong to the natural shifting of the dunes, he realized that whatever lay beneath that spot, it was the reason the mare had held on, the reason the foal had come back, and the reason he had been led here. And for the first time since this began, Caleb understood that the desert had not been empty at all, it had been waiting. Caleb dropped to one knee beside the foal without thinking, his hand moving to the ground where the small hooves had already broken through the top layer of sand, and as his fingers brushed away the loosened grains, he felt it immediately, the difference beneath the surface, something firm, something shaped, not stone, not the natural compacted earth of the desert, but something placed, something deliberate, and his breath slowed as he cleared more of it away, each movement careful, measured, as though he understood that whatever he was uncovering had been waiting a long time to be seen again. And the foal stepped back slightly, not afraid, not uncertain, simply giving him space, its eyes fixed on his hands with that same quiet awareness, while behind him the mare remained still, her breathing now softer, slower, but her gaze never leaving the place where Caleb worked, and the wind shifted gently across the dunes, carrying a faint metallic scent that did not belong to open land. And Caleb paused for a second, lifting his head as if to confirm it, then returned to the task, brushing aside more sand until the outline became clear, edges too straight to be natural, corners too defined, and finally, as the last layer gave way, he uncovered it completely, a weathered metal box, partially buried, its surface worn by time but intact, its presence in this place so unexpected that for a moment he simply stared at it, trying to understand how something like this could exist out here, untouched, unseen, and yet so carefully hidden. And his hand hovered above it before resting against the top, feeling the heat it had absorbed from the sun, the roughness of its surface beneath his palm, and a strange weight settled into his chest. Not fear, not quite curiosity either, but something deeper, something that felt like recognition without memory. And slowly, he shifted his grip, pulling the box free from the sand with a low scrape that seemed louder than it should have in the stillness around them. And when it came loose, he set it carefully on the ground in front of him, the foal stepping closer again, lowering its head slightly, as if to inspect it, while the mare behind him let out a faint breath that carried across the distance between them, softer than the wind, but filled with something that felt final. And Caleb glanced back at her, his eyes catching hers for a brief second, and in that look there was no urgency, no fear, only a quiet understanding, as if whatever purpose had kept her moving through the desert had now been fulfilled. And Caleb swallowed, turning his attention back to the box, his fingers moving to the edge where a rusted latch held it closed. And for a moment he hesitated, the silence around him pressing in, the weight of the moment settling into his bones, because he knew, without knowing how, that opening it would change something, not just in the world around him, but in himself. And yet he did not stop, his hand tightening as he lifted the latch slowly, the metal giving way with a faint, brittle sound. And as the lid shifted upward, just enough to break the seal that had held it shut for who knew how long, the air seemed to still completely, as if even the desert itself was waiting to see what would be revealed. Caleb lifted the lid slowly, the hinges resisting at first as if time itself had settled into them, then giving way with a faint, brittle sound that seemed to echo farther than it should have across the open desert. And inside, there was no gold, no sudden gleam of fortune, only a collection of things that felt heavier than any metal could, papers bound tightly in a weathered leather wrap, a small tarnished badge dulled by years beneath the sand, and beneath it, a folded photograph, its edges curled but still intact. And Caleb's hand hovered there for a moment before he reached in, lifting the photograph carefully, brushing away the fine grains of dust that clung to its surface. And as the image cleared, something inside him stilled completely. The picture showing a man standing beside a mare, strong and unbroken, her coat shining under a different sun, a younger sun, and beside them, a small foal pressed close against her side, its shape unmistakable, its presence too familiar to be coincidence. And Caleb felt his breath catch slightly as he turned the photograph over, revealing faded writing on the back, a name, a date, and a short line etched in ink that had survived the years. "If anything happens, she will lead you back." And Caleb read it twice, the words settling into him with a quiet weight. And behind him, the mare let out one final, soft breath, so gentle it almost blended with the wind. And Caleb turned quickly, his chest tightening as he looked at her, her body now still against the sand, her eyes half closed but no longer searching, no longer fixed on the horizon, as if whatever she had been holding onto had finally been released. And for a moment Caleb did not move. He just stood there, the photograph in his hand, the open box at his knees, the foal stepping closer to the mare with a quiet, uncertain movement, lowering its head to touch her once more. And the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something that did not need words, something that settled into the space between them and made it sacred in a way Caleb had not felt in years. And slowly, he looked back down at the contents of the box, his fingers moving through the papers, scanning lines that spoke of land rights, of ownership, of claims long forgotten, signatures that tied everything beneath his feet to a story that had been buried, hidden away, waiting for someone to uncover it. And Caleb understood then that this was not just a discovery, it was a transfer, a passing of something from one time to another, carried not by men, not by law, but by a creature that had refused to let it disappear. And as he closed the box carefully, holding it in both hands, he glanced once more at the mare, then at the foal, standing beside her, with a quiet strength that seemed far beyond its age. And for the first time since this began, Caleb felt something settle inside him. Not confusion, not doubt, but clarity, a quiet understanding that he had not found this place by accident, that he had been brought here, led step by something that had trusted him long before he had any reason to trust himself. And as the wind moved gently across the dunes, carrying the last traces of heat into the fading light, Caleb rose slowly to his feet, the weight of the box steady in his hands, knowing that whatever came next would not be something he could turn away from. Because some truths, once revealed, do not ask for permission to change a man, they simply do. Caleb did not leave right away. Even as the sun began to dip lower and the harsh light softened into long shadows that stretched across the dunes, he remained there for a while, standing between what had been revealed and what had been lost, the metal box held steady in his hands, the weight of it no longer just physical, but something deeper, something that had settled into him in a way he could not ignore. And the foal stayed close to the mare, its small body pressed near hers, not restless, not confused, but still, as if it understood the quiet that followed. And Caleb found himself stepping closer, lowering himself carefully to one knee beside them, his hand reaching out slowly, not to change anything, not to fix what could not be fixed, but simply to be present in that final moment, his fingers brushing lightly along the mare's neck, the warmth still there but fading. And he exhaled through his nose, a breath that carried more than the heat of the desert, something unspoken, something that had been building since the moment he first saw her in the distance. And when he finally stood again, it was not with hesitation, but with a quiet resolve that had not been there before, and he turned toward the truck in the distance, the path back no longer uncertain, no longer something he questioned, because now he understood that this was not where the story ended, it was where it began to change. And the walk back was slower than before, not because of distance, but because of what he carried. The foal following close beside him without needing to be called, its steps small but steady, never straying, as if it had already chosen where it belonged. And when they reached the truck, Caleb opened the door without speaking, setting the box carefully inside before turning back to the foal, studying it for a moment, the way its eyes met his without fear, without doubt, and he gave a small nod, almost to himself, before guiding it gently toward the shade beside the vehicle, offering water from the container he kept behind the seat, watching as it drank in quiet, measured sips, and the desert stretched around them just as it had before, unchanged, endless. But Caleb was not the same man who had driven into it that morning, and in the days that followed, the truth uncovered beneath the sand did not stay hidden. The documents, the name, the claim tied to land that had been forgotten, all of it resurfaced, moving through offices and records, drawing attention from people who had long since stopped looking in that direction, and the story spread, not loudly, not as spectacle, but as something that carried weight, something that made people pause, because it was not just about what had been found, it was about how it had been found, and the foal, growing stronger with each passing week on Caleb's ranch, became a quiet symbol of that story, a living reminder of a path that had been followed not by logic, not by chance, but by trust. And sometimes, when the evening light settled across the fields and the wind moved gently through the open land, Caleb would stand by the fence and watch it, the way it moved, the way it paused at times to look toward the distant horizon, and he would think back to that place in the desert, to the silence, to the moment everything shifted, and he would understand something he had not understood before, that not every journey is meant to save what is lost. Some are meant to reveal what was never meant to disappear, and in that quiet understanding, something inside him found its place again, steady and unbroken, like the land itself waiting beneath the surface.